Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to our 2020 Election Forum series organized by Florida Today, Eastern Florida State College, and the League of Women Voters of the Space Coast. Today, we're going to have the last forum before the August 18th primary elections. It will cover Florida House District 53, which includes South Brevard, including Palm Bay, Grand Valkyria, and Melbourne Beach. Today, you're going to meet Republican Marcy Adkins. Good afternoon, Dr. Adkins. Are you with us?
I had to unmute. Hi.
Hi. Dr. Adkins is challenging State Representative Randy Fine in the Republican primary. By the way, we did invite Representative Fine to attend this forum in June. That's when we sent our invitations to all candidates that are going to be included in our forums this year. But on June 13th, he replied to us, writing that he will decline to attend this event. As you might know from reading Florida Today, Representative Fine has been diagnosed with COVID-19 and was recently hospitalized. We wish him and his family well as a speedy recovery. So the winner of the Republican primary will face Democrat Phil Moore in the November 3rd general elections. And by the way, Mr. Moore is also with us today. Welcome, Mr. Moore. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon, Isadora. I'm fine, thank you.
And we're happy to have you both here. Again, the election is on August 18th for the primary and November 3rd for the general elections. And as you can tell, because of COVID-19, we are doing all of our forums via live video. That's why we're seeing all of our candidates in their homes and not in the same studio. And I'm going to go over the rules of today's forum. Each will have a minute and a half to answer my questions. They also get a 30-second rebuttal if their opponent brings them up. And now we will begin with our opening statements. So we will begin with you, Dr. Adkins. How's that? A minute and a half to introduce your voters.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Marcy Adkins, and I moved to Brevard 53 years ago in 1967. So I'm a child of Brevard. I'm a Melbourne Bulldog, a Hoover Groover, and an Ocean Breezer. I have an old, deep love for Brevard. I earned my PhD in economics from the University of Florida, go Gators. And I ran my own economic consulting practice for 27 years. Most of it has been here in Brevard County. I moved back here home 24 years ago. My life has always been private, never public, always outside politics, focused on my family and my church. I am a Christian wife and mother, principally, first and foremost. I feel that I've been called to run for this office for such a time as this. I believe we need a professional economist in Tallahassee more than ever. I love history. I love the Constitution, and my family has been involved in living history for more than 10 years, where we dress up once a year in costumes from the 1700s and we quote the founders. That's just a deep, deep love of mine. But that's important because we have lost in South Brevard, we've lost many First and Second Amendment rights that were lost when a liberal has sat in this seat for the past 4 years. I entered this race because I know Brevard deserves better, and I am better for Brevard, and I look forward to serving you. Thank you, and I hope you can vote for me in this upcoming primary on the Republican primary on August 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate this opportunity to be able to attend this event in these most difficult times and to provide some reassurance that electing the right people will lead us on the right path and help us get through this. I'm a second-generation native Floridian and have been in Brevard County for the past 23 years. During my years here, I have been an advocate for cycling and pedestrian safety, an environmental activist, and lobbied for the needs of our community in Tallahassee. I am running to deal with the broken unemployment system that continues to affect millions of Floridians, including myself. I am running because I represent many in Brevard and in Florida as a person who works 2 jobs in order to make a living. And I am running because we need leaders who deal in science and facts, not personal attacks or gut feelings. I look forward to being able to address these issues and more for our community in Tallahassee. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's move on to our first block of questions. And I think it's not surprising that it is about COVID-19, which I think is probably going to be one of the top issues in the next legislative session. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic is being described as the country's greatest challenge. What have you learned from this crisis, and what would you change about how the state has responded to the pandemic? And Mr. Moore, you're going first.
Right. And I agree. It is the most pressing issue that we need to be dealing with right now. The way I look at COVID-19 is I like to use a saying that is popular. Many people might know it. An ounce of prevention leads to a pound of cure. And that's where we have failed in the state of Florida, and perhaps even in the nation, but more specifically in the state, is that we need to be making sure that we are looking at methodologies and ways that we can prevent the spread of the virus. This is a new, unknown virus to us. We don't fully know, even the medical experts are still figuring out how to best deal with this virus. We should be making every small step possible to try to decrease the spread so that people aren't getting sick. And that is not the action that the governor has been taking. He has not implemented a mask mandate. He's left it up to counties. He's left it up to school boards, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon, on how to deal with this. Instead of listening to the medical experts in the CDC, in the FDA, we're not following their lead and following what they're instructing us to do. And that is the reason that Florida is in the state it is in right now, with our cases going up or higher than they were before, and also looking at the number of deaths that are still on the rise. We need to make sure that we are protecting all the citizens in the state of Florida and trying to reduce and stop the spread.
Dr. Adkins, on the state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, so I am diametrically opposed to mandates. As a conservative Republican and as a believer in the Constitution and everything that our nation was founded on, I'm all about freedom. Now, I don't say that to fault Trump, and I don't say that to fault DeSantis for the steps that they took at the beginning, because this was an unknown, unknowable, and it still is a horrible virus. But we really don't have the facts on anything. As far as mandating, I've seen mandated masks in places with threats of terrible fines and jail time, and I find that draconian. I would much rather educate to the best of our knowledge and inform people that it's wise to wear masks. I wish we have Marcy masks. You can have one if you want. But anyways, we have Marcy masks, and we wear masks in my family. We social distance, we don't go in crowds because we are not going to get COVID. So we're very careful and we're very wise, but I do not want draconian measures. And I'll quote C.S. Lewis on this. Of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. So that was C.S. Lewis from, I don't remember. I can't give you a date, but that's my opinion on that.
Thank you.
Marcy, can we continue on this subject?
Okay, I'm going to ask you, actually, the next question, it's also about the same subject, which is something you brought up, Dr. Adkins. It's about a statewide mask mandate. Let's hear what Mr. Moore has to say about it.
Sure, thank you. So if we listen to the medical experts, Dr. Fauci, CDC, they're all saying that masks can help prevent the spread of the virus. It helps reduce the droplets that you breathe out and that you're speaking, and that can help reduce the spread of the virus. We know that is scientific fact. They've studied that, they've looked at it, and that is a small measure we can take to help reduce the spread. Now, in terms of our constitutional rights, what I believe supersedes is our constitutional right to life. We have a constitutional right to be able to live free of being infected by others from the virus. So it is my right to be able to go around and wear that mask and make sure that I'm not going to contract the virus with possibly unknown side effects, even if I don't get deathly ill. But it's really disturbing that the answer would be let everybody get sick, and then we'll see what happens to them in the hospital when we know we can take a measure to try to prevent people from getting sick. That should be the measure we take.
Dr. Adkins, if you want to, I know you kind of touched on the topic of a mask mandated, but if you can talk about it, a lot of experts recommend the use of masks. Why are you opposed to not making it a mandate?
Well, it's clearly just exactly like I said, freedom is important, but I think that you jump to conclusions, Phil, I think, I'm not exactly sure the exact words you just used, but it was that I want to get people sick. No, I don't. I want to educate people. I want to encourage them to wear masks. I want to explain why experts think it's good, but to enforce it and to mandate them is draconian. Furthermore, it's just like child discipline. You tell your child to not do something, and if you do that again, I'm going to spank you, and then you don't spank them, well, there's bad consequences. These mask mandates can't be enforced. These jail times and these huge fines, they can't be enforced, and it's just like bad child rearing, and it leads to social chaos. So we need to have things that are enforceable. If we're going to have a law, it needs to be something that's enforceable. And I don't think that mask mandates can be enforced.
And Mr. Moore, would you like a 30-second rebuttal since
Yeah.
can we move
Yeah,
on?
thank you. So two things. One, it would seem self-defeating to say that if we shouldn't apply any rules or any laws because they're not enforceable. That's not why we're putting them in place. We're putting them in place so that people know what measures need to be taken. And in terms of stopping the spread, we already have laws in place that not so much affects that person, but that we know that will affect somebody else. So your actions can't intrude on somebody else's well-being. And that's why we have these rules in place.
Thank you. I'm going to still on the topic of COVID-19, but I want to move on to a slightly different angle to it. Florida's unemployment benefits are capped at $275 per week, among the lowest in the nation. With so many people now asking for unemployment because of the pandemic's economic impacts, would you support raising those benefits? And if so, what would you raise it to? And Dr. Adkins, you go first.
Sorry, it takes me a second to unmute. Honestly, I don't know. That's the bottom line. I know we may be the lowest in the nation. I want to compare to the other states and get a whole lot more data. So this is definitely an area that I'd study, but honestly, I haven't. So can't really tell you. Sorry.
No problem, Mr. Moore.
Yes, so thank you. And this is a subject matter that I actually do know a lot about because I have had to deal with this disastrous unemployment system. And I call it a disaster by design. It was actually put in place in the previous administration to deter people from being able to collect unemployment. It was done this manner so that people don't have the benefits that they need to be able to survive when they're going through unemployment. And the coronavirus has exacerbated that. It's brought it more to light, the problems that were already there. Would I increase the 275? Absolutely, but I do a lot more than that. And that's one of the reasons why I think that legislators were neglectful in going back to Tallahassee in a special session. That's something they could have immediately addressed and looked at extending the 12-week benefit period beyond 12 weeks, adding to the 275 unemployment benefits, and really redoing the entire process, which has put more hurdles in place to try to deter people from being able to collect those benefits, from having to seek work. Again, 5 days a week, you got to seek work. You have a waiting period before you actually even collect those benefits. So there's a lot that needs to be addressed with the unemployment system the way it is. In fact, I believe even Governor DeSantis came out and said yesterday that he walked into this system that was broken. But I'll mention finally is that there was a 2019 audit that showed that this system was already in dire need and having problems that need to be addressed.
And
Can I respond?
I'm sorry.
Can I respond?
I'll give you 30 seconds. You didn't use up all of your time, so I'll give you.
Sure, but I just don't think, Phil, you weren't answering the question. I was just answering the specific question about exactly how much I would raise the 275 a week to. But I agree with you that the system had problems, and I'm concerned about that very much. And that's very important for the next legislative session for all legislators to look at the problems in the unemployment system. I think they've corrected a lot of them, but I'm actually even concerned that it costs so much to be corrected. So I'm worried about that too. That will be an important part of the oversight.
Yeah. And the U.S. economy experienced an unprecedented collapse during the second quarter, shrinking at a record 32.9% annual pace. If you get elected, this will be your job. So this is a very important question. What should the legislature do to help Florida businesses recover and also prevent Floridians from falling into poverty? Dr. Adkins, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, I'm really proud of our governor on that, on opening up our economy as early as he did and insisting that it stays open despite the fact that we have increasing COVID numbers. Because this is a bad situation. Not only do we have this horrible virus, but we've had devastation to the economy. So it's important that it stays open. I'm glad that he's opened it, and I support that. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, we have to keep it open. So, and then we'll just have to look to see how we can stimulate the economy further in Florida. I have some ideas myself, that we want to do with respect to the Indian River Lagoon, which is a very, very important economic driver here. And that's how I will tackle it from this end, focusing on the needs that we have there. But there's many, many more things too. We're going to have to deal with the tourism industry and all the huge losses there, but it's across the economy.
Okay. Mr. Moore.
Yes, thank you. So the first thing we need to look at is the people who we prescribe to be essential workers through this coronavirus. And we're actually not even paying them a livable wage, but we're demanding that they go back to work prematurely, which I consider prematurely. And when we don't have these numbers in check, and we're saying we must reopen the economy, but that reopening of the economy prematurely is actually going to delay our recovery because we're going to be dealing with the coronavirus for a longer period of time. If we were to manage it right now and stop the spread, we would be able to recover quickly and get our economy going again. But instead, we're looking at actually opening things up when the numbers are actually going up, which is going to increase that. So just to go back, the first thing we need to do, I like that the PPE was put in place. The Fed helped out a lot there with PPE, PUD. We need to make sure that we're continuing to get those federal dollars. It's hung up right now in the Senate, but I look forward to seeing that those monies come through again in the state to help out our small businesses. And I think we need to make sure that we're paying our workforce correctly so that when something like this happens, they're able to survive and sustain themselves without actually having to look for unemployment benefits throughout the long term as well.
Thank you. I want to move on. I want to move on to other topics, but I have to ask both of you questions about things that have come up during the campaign for Florida House District 53. As I explained in the beginning of the forum, the incumbent state representative Randy Fine declined to attend today's event. In his email to us explaining why he wouldn't attend, he said he accused Dr. Adkins of, quote, blatant bigotry. Dr. Adkins, your campaign has been accused by State Representative Fine of allowing anti-Semitic comments on your Facebook page. According to a Florida Today story, your campaign removed one such comment, but you later wrote that it shouldn't have been removed because the man who wrote such comment had a right to express his opinion. My question to both of you candidates is, with the rise of anti-Semitic incidents and the country's ongoing discussion about racism, how will you deal with hate speech on your social media platforms? Dr. Adkins, you're going first.
Sure. I've written extensively on this topic. I have a blog and a press release. As far as the anti-Semitism, we'll just let that go. And you can just go to my blog. There was a press release that refuted all of that. That's just a bunch of nonsense, poppycock. Regardless, that's been well dealt with. But as far as comments on social media, for an elected official, they have to remain. To remove them violates government in the sunshine. That's the bottom line. So they have to remain. Now, I think that it's incumbent upon the representative, me, the soon to be elected representative, to make sure that there's clear social policies and clear discussion. And when ugly comments are made, they're corrected, but they're left there because to remove them is illegal, quite frankly. Likewise, there's a second problem that the incumbents faced. He blocks people from his campaign Facebook and prohibits them from speaking entirely. In fact, I've never even made a comment on his page, but I have been blocked, as has anyone with the Adkins name, none of which have ever even made a comment on his page. But people are blocked routinely, and that is a violation of their First Amendment rights. Thank you.
I just want to follow up because you're not an elected official yet, so I don't believe you're covered by the Sunshine Law. But can you explain how you dealt with the comment that was made, I believe, a couple of months ago?
Sure. Well, let me say, I started following the elected policy on May 12th to make a point that this is how I will conduct myself. So yeah, I'm not covered by the law now, but I wanted to follow the law now as if I was elected. So no one's ever blocked unless they flood and comments are left and they're corrected. But now your question was, how did I deal with that one anti-Semitic comment? I'm just clarifying. Okay. So on May 7th, a person that just created a Facebook account in Tallahassee, just before this comment was made, maybe this could have been a political person from the other campaign, maybe not, I don't know. But regardless, this person made a post on the page that said, send Randy back to Israel. That was on May 7th at 4 o'clock in the morning. At 6 a.m. in the morning, the comment was removed. Then I thought about it, I studied the law, and I developed my social media policy over the next few days. At that time, I said, henceforth, I'm not removing comments because I'm following the law that would impact an elected representative. Okay, so that comment was removed, and then the way Facebook works, you can't put them back. Otherwise, we would have put it back.
Right on that. Mr. Moore, how will you deal with anti-Semitic and hate speech on your social media platforms?
Yes, great. So there was a two parts to that question, and I'm going to leave Representative Fine's actions and statements speak for himself. And I'm going to talk about, the fact that I actually will stand up against racism and anti-Semitism in all of its forms. So if that comes across my Facebook, and granted, there are people who spam Facebook pages just to try to to catch you or to try to take over your platform and try to get you to respond. And I'm not doing that. I don't engage people like that on social media. If they want to reach me, they can do that. They can email me. They can call me. That's the best professional way to try to reach out to anybody who's trying to be in these elected positions. And so that's the way I'll continue to do that. If that comes across, I'll deal with it. I have markers already in place on my social media page. If you use foul language, it blocks it. And if you use racist comments and things like that, it'll block them as well. Or I don't know if it hides it or blocks it, but we have measures in place to deal with those.
Thank you. So the next two questions, I'm going to ask one specifically for Dr. Adkins and one specifically for Mr. Moore. And Mr. Moore, I'll start with you since you just went. As you remember, 2 years ago, you ran for the same seat. Back then in 2018, Republican-funded campaign mailers pointed out he had more than 24 traffic infractions, including speeding tickets, seatbelt violations, and other infractions. You said back then in 2018 that your driving record made you, quote, relatable to everybody. What have you learned from that experience, and what would you like to address that today?
Well, yeah, I learned that, Representative Fine will do whatever he thinks he can do to try to besmirch and attack someone else. He's done that throughout the number of years that he's been in office, so he'll continue doing that. I suspect I'll see that again should he win the August primary leading up to November. But I do think that still makes me very relatable. There are people who have incidences with police all the time. And I can say that I have a good relationship with our police force here in the district with all of our neighboring police officers and police chiefs. And we can talk about that a little bit if we want to. But that helps me understand what's happening with our police force and how they deal with the public in those situations. And it also speaks to the fact that, you can't judge somebody based on part of their history because, that was a part of what I used to do. I had, traffic tickets, I paid them, I dealt with them, and now I moved on and tried to better myself and better the community for it.
Thank you. And Dr. Adkins, a woman named Deidre Logan has accused your campaign manager, Robert Burns, of raping her while they were in the military in 2011, which he denied. Ms. Logan said when she reached out to you about it, you were dismissive. Mr. Burns pleaded guilty to adultery charges, and sexual assault charges were dropped by the military. You have paid Mr. Burns about $25,000 since April for his services. Knowing about the military's history of not pursuing sexual assault cases that was brought to light by the recent killing of Vanessa Guillen in Texas, Do you believe you made the right call in not believing Ms. Logan? And do you think it's the right thing to continue to pay Mr. Burns?
That's an excellent question. Now, one very important thing that you have to pay attention to is not only was he investigated by the military, but he was investigated by the sheriff in the county in Colorado. So two different law enforcement agencies went through all of the evidence, all of the witness statements and everything, and determined that he was not guilty. That's important. So if you don't think that the military does a good job, are you going to disrespect what the sheriff in Colorado does? I'm not going to. I'm going to trust the investigations of two law enforcement agencies. Now, as far as how much I've paid Mr. Burns, I'm not sure. I pay his company, not him. I pay his company $4,000 a month, and I started paying him at the end of March. But his company is him and 7 other people, okay? But yes, I absolutely should continue to pay him, because when you're accused of a crime approximately 10 years ago and proven not guilty for it, yeah, and those charges come up again in the middle of a campaign and where they're reasserted, I just think that's preposterous. But furthermore, it doesn't violate my employment contract. He's not done anything wrong today. And he was proven not guilty by 2 law enforcement agencies then, nearly 10 years ago. So to me, that's what's important. And if I was to fire him today, I would be canceling a contract which he hasn't violated, and that would be immoral of me. So I think that would be wrong.
Sure, and just follow up on that, Representative Fine has brought up a lot of documents showing, and one of them that Mr. Burns pleaded guilty to domestic violence charges. Do you see an issue with that? Do you still stick by Mr. Burns? If you want to comment on that as well, because I know that's something that's been brought up.
Well, the domestic violence, okay, you need to understand the details and then the result of that. His ex-wife charged him with domestic violence for grabbing her wrist and taking her keys away after she prevented him from doing so, getting the keys for 8 hours. He filed for divorce the next day, and the judge commended him on his restraint and fined him $50 in court costs. Okay, so okay. That's that on the domestic violence. So I don't think that that's a big deal. Okay, but you have to look at the details, and that's across the board. I've learned that with everything in politics, it's not even just all of this salaciousness that the incumbent throws out there. It's everything in life. We've got to look at the details. The devil is in the details, and we need to see evidence. And of course, with every single one of his complaints, you know, there's no evidence, nothing whatsoever, and it's all twisted, and false. Okay.
All right, so let's move on to another completely different topic, which is the Indian River Lagoon and the environment. As you know, candidates, this is very important for Brevard County voters. What is the one thing you can realistically do for the lagoon in your first term? You know, that can be a piece of legislation or funding, but I would like to know, what is your plan? And I would like for you to take into consideration the budget constraints that are going to be in place because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And Dr. Adkins, you're going to go first.
Okay, so this is actually something that I intended to be one of the mainstays of my campaign, but we've had to fight all this poppycock stuff. And then I focused a lot on gun rights and reviving the lost Second Amendment rights. But what's really important here is the fact that Florida's ocean economy is huge. Okay, and we have Florida's Ocean Alliance here in Florida, and they've done a study which shows just exactly how important the coastal economy is in Florida to the rest of the state economy. And that's something that is not emphasized a lot. And we need to call it the blue economy, and it contributes the vast majority the state's total economic economy. And I would like to see us develop a public-private partnership for water. I want to call it Water Florida. And it's not unlike Space Florida and Visit Florida. And I would model it after that. But I'm going to start talking with that. I have a heck of a lot of respect for Debbie Mayfield, and I'm proud of what she did on Senate Bill 712 this past year. And that's one of the first things that I will do is talk to her about this. It's an idea that came up when I was talking to Wayne DeFries about all of this, and I think it's going to be very important to pursue.
Thank you. Mr. Moore.
So when we're talking about the Indian River Lagoon, I'd like to look at the bigger picture too and talk about, global warming and our effect of climate change. The Indian River Lagoon was a great example of how we need to deal with that. The first thing we did was implement a half-cent sales tax, which I supported. And we took the money from that and put it towards science and studies and reviews of what the greatest impact is going to be to help the Indian River Lagoon out. That's the type of thing we need to do with climate change. I would make sure that we're dealing with clean water throughout the entire state of Florida. That would include the Indian River Lagoon. Clean up all the air that we're dealing with in Florida. And we really need to look at, one, of course, was the previous bill that was just passed in the state by Rep. Fine. It actually takes money away from our local community and puts it into the state dollars. So we're actually losing the ability to be able to fix the infrastructure needed to help the Indian River Lagoon. And two, you have to really watch out for those people who call themselves environmentalists, but yet actually vote against environmental bills. And I've actually gone to Tallahassee and lobbied for plastic pollution protections. And right now you might be aware that there are preemption laws that the current legislators have voted in place that says we can't ban plastics. There's multiple fracking. I've been up to Tallahassee to fight against fracking laws. They've tried to destroy Florida's environment through fracking. And the last one, most recently passed, was a huge toll road that's going to destroy West Central Florida's all of its wildlife there.
We'll move on. It's still on the same topic. I believe, Mr. Mort, you brought up climate change. My question is, do you believe that climate is changing because of human activity? If so, what should the legislature do to address climate change and sea level rise? Mr. Mort, you're going first.
Yeah, thank you. So I do. And one of my pieces of legislation that I want to put forth right away, it addresses that and helps increase the amount of solar activity we're using in the state of Florida. And I'll share with everybody right now. What we've been doing in the state is actually relying on fossil fuels, so much so that even recently we said that we need to put backup generators on hospitals, nursing homes, and facilities like that. Those facilities should have solar backup versus generator backup, because what's the first thing that happens when a hurricane comes around is we get a gas run. All of a sudden it's hard to find fuel, but we have a fuel source right there with solar energy. So I want to make sure that we're actually improving our solar energy resources to help our infrastructure out so that we mitigate the need for fossil fuels. And that's one of the first pieces of legislation that I want to put forth. Yes, I do agree that we are a huge contributor into global warming, and we need to address it now because the scientists are already showing us what we need to do. And if we delay this process, what will happen is the same thing that happened with the Indian River Lagoon. The scientists said this from the 90s, that we need to do something about it. And it wasn't until it was on the verge of collapse that we finally said, hey, I guess we need to deal with this. And we can't let climate change do the same thing to our world.
Dr. Adkins, again, the question is, do you believe that climate is changing because of human activity? And if so, what should Florida do about it? And you're muted. You're muted.
Oh, okay, there we go. All right. And I'm going to throw a few more things in there too, because Phil threw a few more things in there too. But as far as whether or not for sure is climate change and sea level rise, that's a debatable issue. Okay, so, but let me go back to what I was saying about the Water Florida, the public-private partnership that I think that we need to have. And I think and the reason that that's important addresses this, because what's missing in the state of Florida for research and allocating the funds from Tallahassee is a framework for delivering the dollars. I mean, we have a framework right now. It's different legislators getting little pots of money and bringing it back. But if we have a competitive delivery system where scientists, experts from the universities can battle for these dollars and the best science wins, that would be good. So we want a competitive delivery system for the research that's done on all things, including answering the question, is the climate change causing the sea level rise? And then just as far as fossil fuels and solar, all of that's good. But I am opposed to having the government interfere with the market. So I'm a free market economist, and I am opposed to having government intervention there too much. Okay.
Thank you. Now let's move on to the topic of guns and gun control. And the first question is very simple. Do you support the open carry of firearms? Dr. Adkins, you're going first.
Sure, I do. I do support open carry. That I know the county commission brought up the other day. That wouldn't have been one of my first agenda items, honestly. It would have been in the gun rights area, constitutional carry. But open carry is not a problem for me, so I do support that as well.
Mr. Moore?
No, I don't support open carry. And if we move forward along that line, even our concealed weapons carry, which I'm a concealed weapons carry permit, it's even they aren't very strong. What we have to do in order to pass that test is very weak. I'd even look at reciprocity laws because we have some other states that don't require any training whatsoever, and I think that's important that we have proper weapons training so that we have increased the safety there.
Thank you. And after the Parkland shooting, the legislature passed a so-called red flag law, which allows law enforcement to ask a judge to take a person's firearms for a year because he or she poses a danger to themselves or others. Do you support that law? Would you ever vote to expend it? Mr. Moore, you're going first.
So yeah, I do see that was actually a big benefit having that law in place. It's a proactive measure, and I think that's one of the things we need to look at is what we can do proactively versus reactively. And if we see people are at risk of harming themselves or others, and we see these warning signs, we need to be able to address them. In fact, even our sheriff has actually used this red flag law numerous times since it's been enacted. So he even sees the benefit of having this tool to being able to use in his tool belt. And I fully support making sure that we're not allowing people who could harm themselves. And this is a small step to be able to do that. So I would vote in favor of extending it.
Dr. Adkins?
Bad from my perspective. I'm going to quote C.S. Lewis again. Of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It's better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. Okay, so anyways, that's C.S. Lewis for you. But the red flag laws allow the government to confiscate legally owned firearms from otherwise law-abiding citizens and deny them to keep and use them and bear them with very little evidence and no crime being committed. These laws force gun owners to go before a court after the fact, after their guns have been seized to prove they're not guilty, effectively turning our entire legal system on its head. Violate my due process, and I am not happy. That's a right guaranteed by my Constitution, and I demand it.
Thank you. Still on the topic of guns, since the passage of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School Public Safety Act, some conservatives have floated the idea of removing gun control provisions contained in it. The bill raised the minimum age to buy a firearm from 18 to 21, instituted a 3-day waiting period to purchase a gun, and banned bump stocks, which allow semi-automatic rifles to fire faster. Would you support repealing those provisions? And if so, would you repeal all of them or just some of them? And Dr. Adkins, you're going to go first.
Okay, good. So one of the things that I need to point out first, and this is why one of the many reasons why I'm going to win this election, is that both the incumbent voted for the red flag laws and the incumbent voted for Parkland, stripping the gun rights from the 18 to 20-year-olds, and other things. So that's really important. But yes, I do want my son to have the right to buy a gun. He's 20 years old. He's been training with guns since age 12. He could have gone into the military and given his life for this country at 18. Since he's well trained, I have no problem with him having a gun. Quite frankly, he was wise enough and well trained enough to have a gun at age 16. Okay, so fine for him to wait till 18 though. So I do want that restriction removed. It's taken away his rights entirely and the rights of many, many Americans that are guaranteed by the Constitution, the Second Amendment. I don't really have a problem with the 3-day waiting period though, but I do have a problem with the bump stock stuff. So, all right.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, so I think this is a good example of where we separate in our views on things, and I definitely support the measures that were put in place from the Marjory Stoneman Douglas bill. They have shown that they have been effective, but they've been only recently implemented. It's only been a few years. So it hasn't been that long to see where we stand. I would keep all those things in place that we look at. And in fact, I even go further. I'd be looking at trying to include a background check, a universal background check portion to that. I know we're not looking at that bill specifically, and I doubt that it'll even come up again in legislative session in the future. But we'd be looking at other things about gun rights. So I would support that.
Thank you. And I want to move on now to criminal justice and police and reform. During the 2020 legislative session, a host of criminal justice reform measures died, including one that would have given judges more discretion to depart from minimum mandatory sentences for nonviolent drug offenses. Another bill would have allowed the early release of some seriously ill and aging inmates. George Floyd's death has intensified calls for police and criminal justice reform. Could you please name specific reforms you would support as a lawmaker? Mr. Moore.
Well, you actually just hit on two of them, and I've actually been reviewing both of them. Mandatory minimums actually unjustly keep people in jail for, like you just said, minimum infractions. And we're actually jailing people without giving them the opportunity to be able to integrate back into society and become productive again. And that is a travesty of what we're asking, we're trying to implement here. It would be the opposite. We need to review mandatory minimums and see where we can remove them. And the same thing holds for people who are elderly. Once they've served a certain amount of time, they are no longer going to be a detriment to society, and they're actually going to be more at risk of anything in the prison system. So I would definitely be looking at those two things specifically, and I have been reviewing them. And I do think, in general, we do need to look at criminal reform and where we stand with all of those issues and how that affects people of color and other communities as well.
Thank you. Dr. Adkins.
Oh, well, unlike Phil, I haven't been looking at these, but I don't really have a problem with them. I really want to look at them and think about them more, but I don't have a problem with looking at them, and certainly reducing the sentences for the elderly. That's not a problem for me. I agree.
And actually, Dr. Adkins, I would like to follow up on the bump stocks. Actually, someone brought it up on Facebook. Why do you oppose repealing that provision that bans bump stocks? Just very quickly, if you can clarify that.
I'm just a strict constitutionalist, and our right to bear arms is sacrosanct. It's related to, was originally called a natural right. I don't really want any limitations at all. A 3-day waiting period, okay. But beyond that, nah, I just don't want it.
Okay. And still on the topic of criminal justice and social justice, I actually asked this question before in a different forum and got some really good responses, so I'm curious to see what we're going to get. Could you please name things you have done in your personal and professional life to improve the lives of people who are discriminated against, including people of color, the LGBT community, women, or religious minorities? Dr. Adkins, you're going first.
Sure. Okay. I didn't do this by design, but I did it by, it's just sort of my path of life. But when my son was 11 years old, he decided he wanted to become a boxer. And he wanted to go to University Boxing Gym, which is downtown in one of the most impoverished areas. And so I went there, and I've made lifetime friends there, and I even have a second son from the boxing gym. I've developed deep relationships, and I've learned that many people in that community think that it is a viable, wise decision to become a drug dealer. And in fact, my second son actually did feel that way and was a drug dealer. He is no longer a drug dealer because of the relationship that I and many, many, many others from the boxing gym and the Melbourne Police Athletic League. So I've been very, very involved with that, and I think it's very, very important. So I respect the police, and I love their involvement with our inner cities.
Mr. Moore?
So one of the things I think we lack to see from our leaders, from our representatives, from our legislators, is after the death of George Floyd, we didn't see a lot of people reacting to it. I actually took a little bit of a measure, and I made sure to call all of our chief of police in my district, and we sat down and talked. And some of them were gracious enough to give me an hour or more of their time. And the things that I wanted to express to them that we needed to look at was in order to regain public trust, we needed to make sure that we were transparent with our police force and how we're interacting with our communities. And I wanted to see uniformity. I didn't want to see, a person being treated in West Melbourne different than they're treated in the county. And we had some frank discussions there on what we were doing good and things that needed to be improved upon. And I think that really speaks to what we want to do with what we want our legislators to do. We want them to make sure that they are bringing forth these issues locally. And if we need to make reform and change, that's the only way we're really going to know it. It's what's happening with our local community, and then go forth and try to implement that change in Tallahassee. So I can tell you, after speaking with the chiefs, they are making some changes and some progress. West Melbourne, for instance, has body cams and dash cams. Palm Bay is looking at body cams. Melbourne is also looking at body cams. And I, as the legislator, will do what I can to make sure that I will support them and fund them if I can make that happen.
All right, we're going to move on now to healthcare. And actually, I'm going to give you now 1 minute to answer the questions, just because we're approaching the end. We have roughly 10 minutes left. So the question is, with the massive unemployment in Florida due to the pandemic, many households have lost their employer-provided health insurance, and many other families are now unable to pay their health insurance premiums. The legislature has failed to pass comprehensive reform to expand access to health care. For example, a bipartisan version of Medicaid expansion that would have covered roughly 1 million low-income adults failed in 2013. What would you support to expand healthcare coverage to millions of Floridians? And Mr. Moore, you're going first.
That answered the question. It's Medicaid expansion. It hasn't been passed in the state of Florida. It's been a failure from our legislators and our governors to be able to pass that, to accept those federal dollars. And it also shows us that we need to reform our healthcare system. It should not be tied to employment, as healthcare is a right that we all need regardless. And especially in a time when there's a coronavirus, when there's a pandemic, when you could possibly get sick outside of even being at work, and you don't have any health care for that period of time. So we need to reform healthcare overall in the nation and in the state of Florida. We need to accept those Medicare dollars, and that will help millions of Floridians immediately. It will help millions of Floridians make sure that they have coverage that they so desperately need right now.
Thank you. Dr. Adkins?
Well, not surprisingly, I disagree. So I would not expand Medicaid. I also was very opposed to Obamacare. And as a matter of fact, I do think that insurance should have been tied to employment. I had great insurance, as my husband worked for Harris Corporation for more than 30 years, and we had great retirees insurance, my son and I both, which we lost as soon as Obamacare came in. That was the benefit my husband worked for his entire career, and we lost that. But Obamacare, that insurance is so expensive that I actually had it at first, but then chose not to have health insurance because the insurance is far too expensive. And I would much rather pay out of pocket. And I've been to the hospital and I pay out of pocket for it. So I wish that insurance was tied to employment, personally.
Can I respond?
Actually, I'd like Dr. Adkins to say, what would you support if you're in the legislature in terms of expanding access to healthcare? I know there are bills proposed from both sides of the aisle. Is there anything that you would support?
I haven't really looked at the plans from either side of the aisle in detail, but I wish it was the way it was in the olden days, tied to employment, because the market works. So, and it was a great benefit that we had. So I'm not exactly sure how to get back to that, the good old days, and I don't think that we really can because it's been destroyed with Obamacare. But the market does work. I'm not exactly sure how to move it back towards more of a market solution.
Okay. And Mr. Moore, 30 seconds.
Thank you. So I actually, again, am opposite. I haven't had healthcare insurance for the last 10 years, and my employers don't provide it. So I would have to look at paying out of pocket for anything that happens to me. And even during that time, I've broken my collarbone, I've torn my pec, and I just had to let those heal on their own because I couldn't afford to be able to go to the hospital and incur the thousands of dollars in medical bills that it would have cost me to be able to do that. So when you don't have employers actually providing, that was 30 seconds. Okay.
All right, thank you. Now, I actually want to learn more about your personal style and a little bit more about you, candidates. So I would like to know, can you name the first two or three bills that you would like to sponsor if you get elected? And I think, Mr. Moore, you're going first in this one. It might be out of order at this point, but you both get a minute to answer.
Okay, so I just mentioned one of the first ones is I want to look to make sure that we're supporting our environment in the best way possible. And that would be to help encourage the market with solar energy and renewable resources. So I would make sure that we put in place a bill that will help out our district. One of the areas that I want to make sure that we're covering solar is wastewater management facilities. We don't want to see those things go down in power, especially during a hurricane. And it's got a lot of room that can actually have solar panels throughout the entire range of the wastewater treatment facility plant. So I want to encourage that type of growth and economic growth in the area. So that's one of the first bills that I've looked at to bring forth to Tallahassee. I'm sure there are others, but that's one of my first main ones. I do have a couple other ones that are still being drafted, and I'm putting those together.
Dr. Atkins, what would be your first 2 to 3 bills filed if elected?
The first two, one is constitutional carry. Second is to restore the rights of the 18 to 20-year-olds that no longer can buy guns. So 1, 2 there. The third one, because I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, is to bring some money to the Indian River Lagoon. And that's going to involve everything that the incumbent is not. That's going to involve respect, integrity, and collaboration with others. He has not brought one nickel to the Indian River Lagoon, despite the fact that he sends out postcards and tells everyone he's brought in 50 million. That was that Altman that brought in some money, but not the 50 million that was promised to be brought in. And he hasn't brought in a nickel. And instead, like Phil said earlier, what he's done is he's taken dollars from here and sent them to Tallahassee with increased fines. So there's less money in Brevard County since Fine has been in the job. But so 1, 2, 3. 1, constitutional carry. 2, 18 to 20-year-olds. And 3, money for the Indian River Lagoon.
Thank you. And I believe you brought up collaboration. Given the state of political division in our nation, can you describe specific instances in your personal or professional life in which you demonstrated your ability to reach across the aisle to people with whom you disagree on an issue? Dr. Atkins, you're going first.
Well, I think this whole campaign has demonstrated that. I think the fact that since May 12th, when I instituted my social media policy of not banning anyone and letting anything go, I think we actually have improved the debate on my page some. It's still a bit of the wild, wild west, but I think we can talk a lot of times. We can even tell people, well, maybe you're not looking at that exactly right. Maybe you're being a little bit rude, but I think if you're nice and polite, it goes a long way towards working together, and that's essential. Also, providing evidence across the board is essential so that people really know what you're talking about. So I think that's important. Transparency is everything.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, I think it's critical when you're trying to be a representative to a district, and you don't want to have somebody who burns bridges like we have currently. We want somebody who's actually going to build those relationships. And I can say since I ran in 2018 that I've been working and I have actually a very good relationship with people from across the aisle. I have many friends who are Republicans. I talk and can call up our county commissioners, our school board members, people in our towns and in our cities. And we have a good working relationship. And yes, we will disagree on issues. But the point is just to bring forth my viewpoint, the viewpoint of the people who have brought concerns to me, and address that with them. And I say, if we don't have a good working relationship, I can't help them do what I can in Tallahassee for the district. So we have to be able to work together.
And we have to move on to closing statements now. I'm sorry. And we're actually running out of time. And I'm going to ask you to give your closing statements, and you each have 1 minute. And Mr. Moore, we'll start with you.
Great. Thank you, Isadora. I'd like to thank you, League of Women Voters, Florida Today, Eastern Florida State College, and all of you watching. I'm running because we need representation in Tallahassee for the working class citizen. I'm running as someone who is an environmental activist for clean water, clean air, and a clean Indian River Lagoon. I'm running to be a voice for those who are homeless, can't afford housing, or medical care and who struggle to make ends meet. I know because I have been there with you. I'm running to be a voice against discrimination, against racism, and to fight for equal rights for everyone. I'm running because we need leaders who deal in science and facts and not personal attacks in order to deal and address this pandemic and future emergencies. I hope after hearing today's discussion, I have earned your vote. Please go to votefillmore.com to find out more information on my platform. And remember, in November, you deserve more. Thank you.
Dr. Adkins. You're muted. You might want to unmute yourself. Yes.
Okay, again, sorry about that mute. So thank you to everyone. Thank you for hosting us, and thank you to Phil. I'd like to meet you someday. I've enjoyed being with you here today. But and I also thank everyone who's watching and listening seriously to the two of us and treating this race seriously. The electorate, we thank you the most of all for paying attention to us. As I've said many times, I have felt called to run for this office for such a time as this. I ran for this seat given the fact that I knew that the incumbent had no integrity, no respect for others, and no ability to collaborate in a bill that I watched him put forth in February of this year. Those are attributes that he lacks entirely, and the three most important things that I think any representative should have. And I think both Phil and I would have them. But beyond that, I now, in addition, see that my professional background is important. The fact that I have a PhD in economics is huge. And what's most important, I think, is that I'm a true Bavardian, one that moved here 53 years ago, a wife and mother. Oh, am I over?
Yes, you're over.
Okay.
I think we got more than 56 minutes of both candidates. Again, Marcy Adkins will appear on the Republican primary on August 18th. She's running against incumbent Randy Fine, who declined to participate today. Phil Moore will be on the general election ballot on November 3rd. Again, candidates, I appreciate you both being with me today. Best of luck and stay safe during this pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.